the DeAndre Hopkins trade was an indication that teams are really not that willing to give up that much to get an elite receiver. You made that point last week. So knowing that, what was your reaction to what the Titans did give up in order to get Julio Jones?
It was just a matter of, which team was going to end up with him and for what was going to be about a second-round pick. I mean, that's the best they were going to do, despite what a lot of people in the media were trying to tell you. Otherwise, there was no first-round pick out there for him. There was no feeding frenzy. There was no bidding war. There were some interested parties, but $15 million is a lot of money. 32 years old, coming off injury. After what looks like it has the potential to be another very robust receiver draft, and we just had what people were calling a generational receiver draft the year before that. So, yeah, Jim, I think that this was always a salary dump. It played out as more of a salary dump than a football trade when you talk about what this player has accomplished in his career. And they move him to the other conference, and they get their second-round pick, which was about as good as they were going to do. But that doesn't exactly mean that the Falcons are in great shape.
Right, and I will double back to that in a minute. But let's talk some more, Jason, about the Titans. So, now, if you're an opposing D coordinator, how do you go about stopping an offense with Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown? Who is your priority to stop?
It's a good question. I think you have to take away the run game with them. I mean, I think since Tannehill took over for Mariota, he's not leading the NFL in play-action pass attempts. He's definitely in the top 5. And obviously their ability to just bludgeon you on the ground opens things up for those deep shots, especially coming out of play-action. If Julio's healthy, that, to me, is the best 1-2 tandem in the league. I know Dallas might be deeper, or you can argue who they're, what the exact pecking order should be there because they have an abundance of riches, and there's some nice combinations. But AJ is an absolute superstar, and Julio is the first ballot Hall of Famer who, when he's healthy and available, can still be special. They needed another element there, though, Jim, because that defense I'm not buying. And they may have to score into the high 30s to win games, when they're outside of that terrible division they play in. So this was, for me, vital. The tight end position is not what it was before. The wide receiver room on paper before Julio got there was not what it was before. The offensive line isn't quite what it was 2 years ago. And I do think at some point Derrick Henry will hit a wall. But this was a necessary move, and I look at them as much more of the team they have been now with Julio versus before when I thought they were poster boys for regression.
Agree. I have similar questions about the defense, but I love that move. I love that they took their shot. They know that window's closing, and they took the big swing. But I do have questions about the defense. Jason Canfora, my guest. Jason, you mentioned the Atlanta Falcons and where that leaves them. In fact, you've got a piece up right now on CBSSports.com that does tackle that very issue. What does this say then about the Falcons and where they are?
Well, again, if you've been paying attention, and as I've been chronicling and as we talked about at the start of this interview, the Julio Jones thing was what it was. It was a salary dump. But that's on them because they had to wait until after June to trade him to get the cap savings because they've run their cap into the ground year after year after year, generally treating good players like they're great and treating great players like they're, immediate Hall of Famers. And that catches up to you. And this new regime – it's tough, man, when you've got an owner who can still, in his mind's eye, see that Super Bowl loss, and it doesn't feel that long ago to him, still stings like yesterday. But that's an eternity ago. They passed on so many opportunities at so many trade deadlines to start peddling those big contracts for something, to have additional darts to throw come draft time. Because guess what? The last regime didn't draft all that well either. But they certainly love to spend money, and they overpaid their own guys with extensions, and they were perpetually chasing pass rushers, never really to find one. And now you're is Matt Ryan at 36 going to take you to the promised land? Hell no. Is he good enough to mess around and win you 8 games? Probably, and that's the worst. That's the worst part for them because they probably won't be picking this high again. They did this kind of half-buttocked by trading their best player but doubling down on the quarterback for cap purposes and trying to extend a non-existent window, and at the same time passing on some real quality quarterback prospects in the process to take a tight end. It just doesn't all add up to me, Jim, and I think, unfortunately, they remind me of a lot of Dolphins teams for a long time where, like, you're looking at them every year, you're saying they're not really going anywhere, but they'll mess around and be picking around 12 or 15 or 16, not bad enough to get where you really need to be to get blue chippers. And so how do you get blue chippers? Oh, well, we start mortgaging future draft picks. No, but that's what you need more than anything else. I just don't get it.
No, so right. So not bad enough to get the blue chips, but not good enough to contend for the big prize.
Right.
And then a few days ago, Jason Canfora, my guest, a few days back, you also wrote that Julio Jones is not the only Jones in an interesting situation.
Yeah.
So where do things stand with Chandler Jones and the Cards?
Yeah, I mean, look, he hasn't showed up for anything they've done to this point. He lives right down the street. He erased all references to the franchise from his social media. He's set to play out the final year of his 5-year deal with the Cardinals that they've never adjusted, despite him, having between 2017 and 2019, 8 more sacks than anybody in the NFL, despite having 19 sacks the last full season he played. And at the time of the arm injury last year, since he entered the league to that point, no one in the NFL had more sacks than Chandler Jones. But they paid J.J. Watt, they paid DeAndre Hopkins. So we'll see, if they really wanted to sweeten the pot, if they really wanted to take care of him, that would have happened by now. But you've got I think they've got their mandatory work coming up this weekend in terms of, or this week, I should say, in terms of mini camp. So we'll see if they're able to sweeten the pot or make something happen there. But I can tell you, other GMs have been looking at this situation for a while, saying, okay, well, if push comes to shove, and he's not showing up, and he demands a trade, there might be a lot of meat on that bone for $15 million. Basically the same salary as Julio, but a year younger, and playing a position that, Jim, the draft might have been the generational pass rusher draft for exactly the opposite reason a wide receiver, because there was none of them.
I see exactly what you're saying. Jason Canfora is joining us. That makes sense to me. Now, you also recently did a piece for the website where you broke down your predictions for the upcoming season. You had Patrick Mahomes as your MVP, which, as you point out, is not the most radical prediction ever, but right. But when you look at the offensive line, GLC, this season compared to last season, how much better is it?
Oh, I think it's markedly better. I think it's better in terms of quality and potentially quantity, especially if Mitchell Schwartz does just decide to come back for another year at some point down the line or whatever. But I think what they did in free agency, what they did in trade, and what they've done in the draft, they have tripled down on their one most glaring need. And remember, they came, 66 cents away from getting Trent Williams. I mean, it wasn't that close, but they were willing to spend massively for him, even after resetting the guard market for Joe Thuney. So, I think, a healthy Patrick Mahomes, better group in front of him, the running back now a little bit more settled down going into year 2, kind of knowing what, an NFL season feels like at that position versus college in terms of length and grind and everything else. I think Patrick Mahomes is poised to do some amazing stuff again.